Most defendants accept their fate and move on. But when Pam Bondi was blindsided with an unexpected fine, she fought back with a precision that even left the judge questioning his own ruling. It started like any other day in courtroom 3B at a Tampa courthouse, a routine hearing meant to resolve a minor dispute. Pam had been in that room countless times, facing judges with varying degrees of leniency. Today, however, the air felt charged with an unfamiliar intensity. She sat calmly at the defendant's table, her expression neutral as she skimmed through her notes. Across from her, a city attorney adjusted his tie, his demeanor betraying both anticipation and a hint of unease. The case was intended to be a procedural formality, a brief, 10-minute hearing, but the moment Judge Raymond Dalton strode into the room, something shifted. Judge Dalton was a figure of authority. Tall, with a graying beard and deep-set eyes, he exuded an unmistakable air of command, a presence that silently demanded obedience. Unlike the usual practice where a judge would pause to review his files and exchange brief pleasantries with the attorneys, Dalton wasted no time. "Let's get right to it," he announced in a flat, unwavering tone. Pam's instincts told her that today was different. Dalton continued, "The court has reviewed the matter at hand. After considering the arguments, I find that the defendant is in violation of local statute 14B and is therefore subject to a fine of $10,000 payable immediately." A ripple of shock passed through the courtroom. Pam's brow raised ever so slightly. She had anticipated a discussion, a chance to present her arguments, but was met instead with a summary judgment that left no room for debate. The city attorney's glance was almost apologetic. Even he had not expected such swift action. Pam calmly folded her hands on the table and responded, "Your Honor, with all due respect, we haven't even begun proceedings. I have not had the opportunity to present my defense." Judge Dalton's eyes remained unflinching. "The arguments are irrelevant," he stated curtly. "The violation is clear." Inside, Pam's mind raced. This ruling was not simply about the fine. It was a deliberate dismissal of her right to argue. There was a cold precision in Dalton's gaze that suggested he was not merely applying the law, but also sending a message. This was your place, and you must submit. Determined, Pam replied in a measured tone, "If the law were so unambiguous, we wouldn't be here today. I respectfully request the opportunity to present my defense." Dalton's response was almost dismissive. "You are welcome to try, Ms. Bondi, but I assure you the outcome will remain unchanged." At that moment, Pam realized that this was not just about a fine. It was about the principle of due process. With deliberate calm, she adjusted the papers before her and locked eyes with the judge. "Then let's begin," she said, "and talk about local statute 14B, the very statute you claim I violated." She tapped her finger on the printed document. "You say the law is clear, but that same statute has been challenged repeatedly over the past 5 years, yielding various interpretations." Dalton's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. "Consider, for instance," Pam continued, her voice smooth and even, "that the language in this statute is so vague it has been ruled unenforceable in 3 separate cases. Furthermore, just last year, an appellate court determined that imposing fines without providing due process violates constitutional protections." The courtroom fell silent. Even the city attorney, who had been quietly supportive until now, shifted in his seat as if to brace himself for what was coming next. Dalton leaned back slightly, his voice tightening. "Ms. Bondi, these circumstances are not identical to the cases you reference." "Are they not?" Pam challenged, her tone rising just a fraction. "Because from where I stand, the language of the ruling in Reynolds versus Clearwater clearly stated that an administrative fine issued without evidentiary support is subject to reversal on procedural grounds. Surely, Your Honor, you would not want to ignore precedent." A palpable tension filled the room. Dalton's jaw clenched as he absorbed her words. Just then, he interjected, "Miss Bondi, this court does not exist for theatrics. If you have a legal argument, present it. Otherwise, the fine stands." A subtle smile played on Pam's lips, a quiet, knowing smile that indicated she had just turned the tables. Then let us talk about Local Statute 14b, the very statute you claim I violated. She continued, this statute states that any entity failing to comply with municipal regulations may be fined. But the issue isn't the regulation itself. It's the manner in which compliance is determined. The language is broad and ambiguous, contradicting established evidentiary standards. Her words were met with murmurs from the gallery, comprised mostly of lawyers and law clerks who watched intently. Even the court stenographer, who had remained silent until now, repositioned her chair in anticipation. Your Honor, Pam pressed on, I know of multiple instances where this very statute was challenged and partially or fully dismissed due to its vagueness. For example, in Henderson v. City of St. Petersburg, the appellate court ruled that imposing fines without proper evidence violated constitutional due process. Dalton's expression remained stoic, yet a hint of uncertainty flickered in his eyes. He leaned forward. Are you threatening this court with an appeal, Ms. Bondi? Pam exhaled quietly, a controlled laugh escaping her lips without amusement. Your Honor, I am not making threats. I am simply citing the law. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. In that moment, Pam knew she had shifted the power dynamic. The judge, who had so confidently dismissed her, now found himself forced to defend his position. The city attorney cleared his throat. Your Honor, if I may, Dalton raised his hand to silence him, his eyes fixed on Pam. After a long pause, he spoke, Very well, Ms. Bondi. You may present your defense. A small smile tugged at the corner of Pam's mouth, not one of triumph yet, but of cautious satisfaction. Thank you, Your Honor, she said, her tone steady as she began her cross-examination of the enforcement procedures. She turned to the municipal enforcement officer, Officer Brian Calloway, who had just been summoned to the stand. A middle-aged man in a crisp Navy uniform, he took his oath and sat, his face betraying a mix of confidence and apprehension. Officer Calloway, can you confirm that you personally issued this fine? He nodded. Yes, ma'am. And on what basis did you determine that a violation occurred? Pam asked, her voice calm yet incisive. Calloway replied, the statute is clear. The property in question was not in compliance with municipal code. I documented it and issued the fine accordingly. Pam's eyes narrowed slightly. Did you take any photographic evidence of the alleged violation? The officer hesitated before answering, No, ma'am. I did not deem it necessary at the time. A ripple of tension passed through the room. Pam folded her hands behind her back and addressed the judge. Your Honor, in the absence of photographic evidence or written witness statements, how can we assert that there was any violation beyond an officer's subjective observation? This directly contradicts the evidentiary standards set forth in the appellate rulings. Judge Dalton's fingers drummed against the bench. The silence was thick with anticipation. Finally, he spoke. This court will take a 15-minute recess. Pam maintained her composure as she gathered her papers, aware that every moment of this break was an opportunity for the court and the public to reflect on the implications of unchecked judicial discretion. During the recess, whispers echoed in the corridors of the courthouse. Pam sensed that Judge Dalton was regrouping, perhaps even questioning his initial ruling. When the court reconvened, Dalton's demeanor had noticeably shifted. Gone was the earlier assertiveness. In its place was a subtle tension and guarded caution. Sitting beside him was Judge Alan Whitaker, a senior judge whose presence immediately commanded respect. Judge Dalton cleared his throat. Ms. Bondi, you have presented compelling arguments regarding Local Statute 14b. His tone was measured, though a flicker of defeat seemed to lurk beneath his words. Pam met his gaze directly. Your Honor, I am not asking for special treatment. I am asking for consistency. If a higher court has ruled that this statute is unconstitutionally vague, then how can a municipal fine be enforced without adherence to due process? Judge Whitaker leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Ms. Bondi, are you aware of the follow-up ruling which clarified that certain interpretations of the statute may remain enforceable under judicial discretion? Pam nodded slowly. I am aware, Your Honor. However, that clarification also stated that enforcement must meet strict evidentiary standards. In this case, no tangible proof was provided. How does this court justify a penalty based solely on an officer's assertion? The gallery, filled with attorneys and law clerks, listened intently as the tension mounted. Even the bailiff, who had seen countless hearings, shifted his weight in anticipation. Judge Dalton's eyes darted between Pam and the supportive glances from Judge Whitaker. Finally, he said, "Ms. Bondi, this court finds that the imposed fine does not meet the necessary evidentiary threshold for enforcement." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room as Judge Dalton continued. "The fine is hereby overturned." Pam allowed herself a small, polite nod. No overt celebration, just a quiet satisfaction in having challenged the system. As she gathered her documents, Judge Dalton's voice called after her, "Miss Bondi, I underestimated you today." She paused, meeting his gaze with a slight smile. "Your Honor, the law is not defined by personal convenience." With that, she strode out of the courtroom, her heels clicking against the polished floor, leaving behind a silence that spoke louder than words. Outside, as the bright afternoon sun bathed the courthouse in warmth, Pam felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had walked into that courtroom expecting a routine hearing and emerged having challenged an unchecked authority, a victory that resonated far beyond the confines of that room. In that battle of law, power, and ego, Pam Bondi had reminded everyone that the legal system must always be held to the highest standards of fairness and due process. For those who witnessed the proceedings, it was clear power is not defined solely by the authority of a gavel or the title of a judge. It is measured by the courage to stand up for the truth. And on that day, Pam Bondi had shown that even in a system built on rigid procedures, a single voice can demand accountability. If you found this story engaging, remember that in every courtroom, in every battle for justice, there's more than meets the eye. Like, comment, and subscribe, because the fight for a fair legal system is one we all must join.